There used to be a saying in Hollywood that if you want to send a message, call Western Union. Films are for entertainment. They're not to force you to think. They're not to be provocative in terms of social change. Well, gratefully, Stanley Kramer always ignored that line. If you want to send a message, call Western Union. If he wanted to send a message, he made a big and important film, and Hair at the Wind about the debate about evolution, The Caine Mutiny about cowardice and leadership, The Defiant Ones about black and whites getting along together under very difficult common circumstances, The Wild Ones about what happens to a community that is taken over by a gang of motorcyclists. I lost my job in a movie theater when that film was on the screen. I was the popcorn boy, and I kept abandoning the popcorn machine to go watch the film. I'll never forget, of course, Lee Marvin, and especially Marlon Brando. Then, in 1967, guess who's coming to dinner? This country was just emerging from the glory days of the civil rights movement, but the social realities of black and white relationships were yet to be a reality in this country. People were still uncomfortable when they thought about interracial marriage or even integrated dinner parties or social settings of any kind. Stanley Kramer, through the great artistry of Sidney Poitier and Hepburn and Tracy, of course, forced America to confront its own reality. He did it in a way that was at once engrossing and provocative and enduring. I was living in California at the time and spending a lot of my days covering the residue of the Watts riots, the city that was terribly segregated by neighborhood and by social class as well. But when Guess Who's Coming to Dinner came out, it forced everybody, black and white alike, to think about what our future should be and not just about what our past has been. So I'm happy to join in this salute to Stanley Kramer and his remarkable courage, his great filmmaking, and of course, his conviction that this country, in its own special art form, can deal with those issues that are most important to us in moving forward.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is celebrating its 40th anniversary. But the filmmaker behind that extraordinary social instrument and social entertainment was also behind, as a producer and a director, some of the most amazingly socially conscientious pictures ever made by Hollywood. And when you just read Stanley Kramer's credits, you kind of look at those credits and you say, well, that had to be 6, 7, 8 filmmakers that made this amazing contribution to American cinema and to social reality. But in fact, it all came from one heart and one soul and one incredibly talented visionary. And that's one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, Stanley Kramer.
When I think back to 1967, a lot of memories attack me. Number one, it was a very amazing year for my dear friend Sidney Poitier, and he came over to counsel me like he always does, and he's always been my big brother to keep me out of trouble. He said, Quincy, this is the year, I think this is going to be our year from now on, because that year he did To Serve with Love, and we did In the Heat of the Night together, and he did a film by the brilliant Stanley Kramer called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was a profound statement at that time, because there were not a lot of black films made by major directors of any color. I remember the emotions involved there. You know, I've been involved in mixed marriages and so forth, interracial relationships, which doesn't mean a thing to me because it's got nothing to do with that. It's about 24 hours a day of living your life and getting your kids right and everything else. And thank God we've traveled the world enough to understand it's still about a man and a woman. I understood the dynamics, you know, that of what it meant back in that time. This was a year before Dr. King got assassinated. And I've always had the images of the courage and the vision on everybody's behalf, from Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn and Sidney Poitier, but mainly the main vision of Stanley Kramer, who had the courage and the vision to know that this was a necessary thing to do in the States at that time. And it's always will remain in my mind as a big piece of our sociology, because it was a very sociological statement at that time, and a brilliant piece of filmmaking, like all the rest of his work has been.
In an era of filmmaking defined by escapism, Stanley Kramer made his mark, his reputation, taking on tough social issues. A fiercely autonomous producer and director, he had broken through the Hollywood blacklist to make independent films before it was fashionable to do so. He pledged to use film as a real weapon against discrimination, hatred, prejudice, and excessive power. The films he made often dealt with uncomfortable and serious subjects, and he did it without exploitation or political paranoia. The most controversial topics of his day were addressed in films like The Defiant Ones, which tackled racism, On the Beach, which warned of nuclear holocaust, Inherit the Wind examined the teachings of evolution, Judgment at Nuremberg was a condemnation of genocide, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a daring study of interracial romance. Honored by the Producers Guild with the David O. Selznick Lifetime Achievement Award in 1991, another award now bears his name. The Stanley Kramer Award is given to recognize work that dramatically illustrates provocative social issues. This year's recipient is An Inconvenient Truth. Its power is striking, sobering, like the work of Stanley Kramer. It accomplishes what all great films can. It leaves the viewer shaken, inspired, and hopefully invested.
Thank you very much, Lawrence and Harrison. It does strike me that the Stanley Kramer Award is probably it's particularly fitting for the producers of An Inconvenient Truth. When Steven Spielberg saluted Stanley Kramer, he said, and I quote, "Not just for the art and passion he put on the screen, but for the impact he has made on the conscience of the world." Just listening again to the list of all those great movies that were spoken about a moment ago by Harrison Ford, gosh, I'm sure you're just like me. You had all these personal aha moments during those movies. It was just fantastic. He brought powerful social issues to the screen that touched our sense of moral responsibility in the same way that this filmmaking team sought to use. And he used the power of the medium to deliver a message, in this case, of planetary import at a time of grave danger. This really is a planetary emergency. And in any case, by doing so, they have helped to create a moment of opportunity where we really do have a new chance to join together to solve the climate crisis. And what a wonderful way to salute the Stanley Kramer legacy.